labels on what I, so we can say that I'll talk about a little bit of everything, and hopefully everyone will get something out of the talk that I have. So I think kind of I gave a very generic title. I always like to give generic titles because it allows me to make whatever, talk about whatever I want, which is great. So I said navigating the data deluge infrastructure and decision making in the era of big data. So I like to start with like my research philosophy and where I came from. So I am my background. Any material scientists in the audience? We have one. Okay. So my background is in actually material science. So my background is growing these films called complex oxides. They're I was growing ferroelectric materials. You can think of this as like trying to take materials and depositing them onto surfaces and controlling how you deposit them so that they form highly ordered structures that have some unique functional property. The reason why I got very frustrated with this field is because you would go into the lab every single day, you would do pretty much the same experiment, and you get a totally different result for no reason. And then eventually you would get one really good result, the holy grail result, and that would be your paper and your PhD, and then you move on. And I felt that wasn't a really good way to do things. So in that process, we've made a lot of really complicated materials, and to understand those materials, we rely a lot on various forms of characterization. We need to probe our materials and understand their structure. Here I show like a scanning probe microscopy, but so it's essentially it's called an AFM. You have to take a tip that has a very small tip at the end, a cantilever that's attached to a cantilever, and you touch it to a surface. And that's kind of like your finger touching a surface. You can do whatever you want to the material there. And you can explore their properties, their dynamics, and try to understand their structure with nanoscale resolution. This gives us a lot of data. And then so I started collecting lots of data, because at least then I was like, okay, I have one sample, I have lots of data. At least my data is pretty consistent because my measurements are good. And then you're like, okay, how do I deal with all that data? And then this was like 2016 when like AI was just starting to become popular again because GPUs became powerful. And we really started kind of developing techniques to really extract and understand information in these microscopy images. Then there comes like a really practical challenge that I faced as a scientist in my work is like, okay, I have these tools that I can use, but to get my data into a form that I can actually analyze it takes way too long to be relevant. My samples are only around and like reasonable to do characterization maybe for a day, if I'm lucky at best. The samples constantly evolve. Instrument time is hard to get. The sample imaging conditions change. So like we wanted to think, how can we do this better? And we really kind of thought about how we can use kind of, and where I met Shashi is through this A3D3 and the fast machine learning communities, how we can use heterogeneous computing and FPGAs to turn data into information in real time. So I'd like to start kind of practical challenges that I think as a scientist, I come from a very different background, I think, than most in terms of how I got into data science, and that kind of shapes how I view things. So the first problem is like from a scientist standpoint, we're like in a lab and there's a lot of work to go take down all your notes and search and preserve data. Like being able to properly manage your data is incredibly important. And there's a problem in that most data analysis takes much longer than acquisition. You acquire tons and tons of data, and then the analysis takes weeks to months. And we want to decrease that timeline. Data, especially in like the scientific disciplines, there's a very big bias and filter because all the data, if you're a good researcher and you might publish your data along with your manuscript in a field like material science, but you never publish your failed results. That never gets published. And if you're going to start to try to leverage tools like AI, you need to start being able to share data. And I like to think about the infrastructure to do that. So science is distributed, and like as a PhD student, like my PhD students, when they leave, I can never find their data. Like that, all that money that I put into their experiments, that is completely dissipates because they're gone. The side note, I was playing around with ChatGPT to make good good figures or try to make nice, pretty figures. And as you can tell, you can understand that's fair, findable, accessible. Well, that was supposed to be. It should be fair. But it could. I tried very hard to make it spell fair. Spell the words of fair right, and it never could do it. It kind of got the find right. I spent like an hour trying to just like to go in and check it. And this kind of brings up a point of like, a lot of people think AI is this big hammer that can solve all problems. So that's not the case. And I think it's getting even more scary with large language models as a caveat. Like people think they can solve everything. This kind of proves that large language models can't solve anything, because a lot of times you have to think about, and we'll kind of go into this in some of the things that we talk about, that the way that the machine learning models are defined are very ill-posed for the problem that you're trying to address. And you should be looking at that, because if you're trying to solve a practical problem that you have with a tool that is really ill-posed, you're going to get bad results. And the only way you're going to actually solve that problem is if you do what's essentially overfit, or if you have tons of data. Another challenge that we face as scientists is, I think, the HPC infrastructure. How many people like know about HPC infrastructure, played with HPC? Yeah, most people who do AI research don't really know it's if they log into a computer. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, but there's a big problem in that a lot of the HPC infrastructure is built around scheduler systems. And when you have scientific workloads, you need high availability services. You wouldn't want to go onto your phone and type a message into ChatGPT and say, oh, hold on, I have to wait 10 minutes for your line in queue. That's not good. You want it to scale automatically. And for science, it really matters, because we need high availability services. So thinking about how to build that infrastructure into place, while also kind of considering about some of the like economies of scale. And then as a scientist, a lot of times we want to do control. We want to control various processes. Everything's an optimization problem if we want to break it down into something. We want to optimize something. And we have different event horizons for different experiments. Sometimes that event horizon is on the order of seconds. That's fairly easy computationally. Sometimes it's microseconds. It really kind of varies. So in our group, we kind of like try to look at science from a, like, how can we turn it into like our experimental science workloads into something that's more aligned with a computational pipeline, something that like you could schedule, have a declarative language for. So in our system, we really kind of think like we re-envision everything from the ground up. So like we have our synthesis, and we'll talk a little bit more about pulse laser deposition. And then we want to collect all the metadata, because that metadata has a lot of information that allows us to search and ask new questions of the data later. Usually, in most labs, how many people work in like still do experiments? Are you writing in handwritten notebooks? Yeah. If not, the other people are probably using like digital handwritten notebooks that are not indexable and searchable. If we want to start leveraging tools of AI, we know that data is the most important thing. So little effort is put onto actually collecting, collating, and organizing the data. So building the infrastructure to do this, and we work a lot on kind of building the hardware infrastructure that allows us to do that. So we work on this platform called DataFed, which is a scientific data management system. Essentially, what it does is it allows you to, it works on the RangoDB on the back end, which is a graph relational database, allows you to send hierarchical metadata to this database, and then move data alongside it using Globus, which is a grid FTP platform, and allows you to do kind of very nice tools for sharing. And then once you have a database, like once you can actually, instead of having your data and like your microscopy images living on a single computer, if you have a repository that you can search, you can actually start asking new questions that you could never ask before. You can start to search based on similarity. You can search based on metadata. I can search someone else's data that I didn't collect and identify correlations. So this is really useful. This is kind of just a little interface. I'm happy if like after this, if you want to give it a test run, we can give you an allocation. It's a federated repository, which is cool. So like anyone can set up their own repository. It could be like a workstation. It could be a parallel file system. It could be anything. And you can have it and preserve all your data, metadata, do searches, logical queries, has provenance graphs, lots of really cool features that allow you to explore your data. This is particularly important when you have like really complicated systems. So it seems like obvious, but also not. Like user experience really matters. Scientists are very lazy. If it takes an extra step, they're likely not going to do it. So we really have to, we even collaborate with some people who work on just UI UX just to see like, what are the things that they're taking time to do? Because the easier it is, the more likely they are to be compliant. And if you don't have people be compliant, it doesn't matter what you build on the back end. If they don't use it, there's no data there. So like this is for our pulse laser deposition system. So we re-envision the whole control system. We collate various forms of different data into the system, different multimodal data acquisition systems, and kind of create a single record that is searchable and indexable. So it allows us to kind of then do sorts of machine learning that we want to do in the end. So getting the data is always the first and hardest step. Once you have data and you have metadata, you want to be able to discover different things. And a lot of times you don't know what ontology you want, how you want to do your search. You want discovery tools. So I work a lot with this person, Jeff Heflin at Lehigh. We're kind of building out this platform that uses Elasticsearch on the back end, but does cell-centric search. Allows you to go through and discover what are the correlations that are interesting to you and within your metadata. So there's like metadata, and defining metadata is really important. It allows you to also, and you think later of training models, you might want to train models and have different regularization parameters, train models on different things. And metadata can be a really nice tool for regularization parameters, something that we're kind of working on. So in my case, I do a lot of microscopy. I look at images. These are piezo response force microscopy. You don't need to know what this is. We're not going to talk that much about it, but they're nice, pretty images. You can actually see individual atomic terraces on there if you want to nerd out on it. But we have instruments, and hundreds of users go and collect images. And those images sit with a file in a folder with a name that's like sample name, good, version 2, version 3, version 4. Everyone's probably seen this if you use one of these instruments. And what happens after a month? That even the person that collected it can't find the data. Better yet, anyone else. So we thought, like, could we at least put a little Band-Aid on this problem? And this is a really old model. It was just to show for the people who don't know anything about machine learning, it's a convolutional neural network. What's important is that if you take data, train a classifier, that last little layer at the end learns some low-dimensional representation of similarity. And if you do 2D manifold projections like UMAP, you can see, okay, we get kind of what we expect. So you can see a bunch of people here. You can see chickens over here. That's not that interesting. But what gets more interesting is that you start to say, okay, this was trained to classify chickens or cows, and it doesn't know that chickens and cows are both animals, but it still groups it together. So there's some semantic similarity. So then we go say, okay, this works. Like we can identify similarity. Let's just throw this at our piezo response force microscopy image and see what we get. We get utter garbage. It's total garbage. Makes sense. Why? Because we don't have cats and dogs. What do we care about here? We care about this is material science. So really, the primary thing we care about is like order, periodicity, and symmetry. That's a really important concept in material science: structure, property, relations, order, periodicity, and symmetry. So said, okay, let's try to re-envision this. Let's train a new model. We trained this is a ResNet 50. It doesn't really matter what model it is. I'm personally of the view optimization is way more important than the architecture, but that's a caveat. But we made a data set that's the wallpaper group symmetry. So in 2D, there's 17 different wallpaper groups that represent all the 2D periodicity that you have. And we said, let's train a classifier to classify wallpaper group symmetry. We made a data set. I think at this stage, maybe it was 1 million images. Essentially went to ImageNet and would take a region of that image, do the symmetry operation, create an image. We adjusted various metadata parameters like the scale, the size, the rotation. cetera. So these are the different 17 wallpaper groups with just some examples. You train a model and validate it, and you get almost perfect accuracy. That's always what happens with neural networks. You just train them, they always give you the perfect accuracy. This is a case where you can see this is the validation that I think was an 80-20 split. So they're, in this case, 12,000 per class. So you think that's pretty good. We'll prove later that's not actually learning symmetry. It's a bit of a myth. But anyway, if we have at least a symmetry-aware neural network, now we have some of the features that we want embedded into that learned representation. So then if we go and we start to pull out regions, like things start to look like they're identifying similarity. This was just 25,000 random images from an instrument that was sitting there idle, essentially lost forever because no one could ever find anything. And I go here and then I start to look at what these samples are. They're all the same material. This is a classical domain structure in lead zirconium titanate 2080 PCT. This is an area that has striped BFO. There's another area that has mixed domain structures, this is BFO and PZT, lead zirconium titanate. So like this allows you to start to say like, okay, I have this big database. I can at least start to explore with only images. That's really useful for someone who doesn't know where to look. They could see if other people did similar experiments, if other people saw similar structures. It's useful. We took it kind of a step further because once you have a latent representation, you can do things like do recursive searching. We built some interactive tools that you can go in and say, okay, I'm going to select a region of interest and then redo a projection within that region. So now the manifold is much easier, and then you start to see you have a lot of correlation. So this is an area where we're patterning some stuff. And like, I didn't know where those samples were. I didn't know where the files were. Now I found them in a minute or two. And you can see that there's a lot of correlation and structure there. So as you start to be able to link image similarity, even if it's not a good metric, because I would say this is not a robust machine learning model, you can start to, and if you can link that with metadata, you can really start to extract some interesting information from data that you know that you've really had no use for. So now I'm going to go back to this concept of symmetry. So I thought once we did this and we saw this, we thought this was kind of an interesting problem because you think about a convolutional neural network, it's really ill-posed to learn symmetry. You want to learn rotation very precisely. You want to learn if you have a small deviation that it breaks symmetry slightly. You want to learn glide, which doesn't exist. You want to learn mirror or reflection, which doesn't exist. In the convolutional neural network, you have pooling layers that kind of decimate your information about your spatial precision. It's a really ill-posed problem. So we were pretty surprised when you saw that a model could actually learn symmetry. So we made a data set and we wanted to try to see, we made a million images just to kind of see what would happen. Okay, you still get really good results. Like this looks good, but what happens if you go out of distribution? So if we're trying to train a model that learns symmetry, it should learn symmetry no matter what it's looking at. If it's looking at a data set created from ImageNet, a data set that looks like atoms, that has like atomic structures, or a data set that was created from random noise that has the same dimensionality, same structural features. And when we do that, we actually see that it's not the case. We don't get, it doesn't work so well, particularly on the atomic data set. You can see the confusion matrix. You no longer see that diagonal. That diagonal means perfectly correct. It starts to get about 60% accuracy. So we've been trying to do a lot of architectural modifications, like adding in special kernels and things to try to improve this. Nothing seems to work. We've tried, the first thing everyone says is do an FFT. That really doesn't work. It actually gives you way worse results. You almost get, you get 2% accuracy when you do an FFT, and that's the first thing everyone always says. So if you have any good suggestions, I'm happy to take suggestions, but I don't think it's possible right now to learn symmetry from images. But what was interesting is that with the noise data set, when we had just 1 million images, this also had 60% accuracy. So it really says size matters. So when you get 10 million images, that's 13 terabyte data set. Then we're starting to really see some differences. Now I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about kind of some other areas that I think are are cool. So in like experimental science, we want to be able to extract something that we can actually understand. And I think a lot of people use neural networks in what I feel is the wrong way. Because the problem is that with a neural network, it's kind of like taking a circle and then putting a triangle on it. And then if you take many of these triangles and put them around in a circle, eventually it looks like a circle. And that's how you're solving your problem. It's really ill-posed. So then if you got a smaller, slightly smaller circle, anything out of distribution at all, it fails completely. And that's just not useful. So what we really want to do is embed more physics in. We want to embed governing equations, expressions into the model itself so that we can actually extract something meaningful. And this allows us to be much more declarative and to use the information much more. Then there's a question of, okay, how do we go at the right time scale? And time scale for science means a lot of different things. So everyone says real time, and then they're like, but real time could be a minute, real time could be a second. And depending on where you are, it could be a millisecond. You really have to think about your infrastructure and your hardware. So depending on kind of where you are in this relative time scale, you need to think about what kind of computing hardware you need and how you want to deploy it. And you need to think about co-design. Well, like how do you co-design for the full set of constraints that you have? So your system, your data rates, your networking, your computation, all these things matter. So we're going to start with a kind of simple example. This is a technique we use a lot. It's called band excitation piezo response force microscopy. You don't need to know too much about what it does. We're looking at ferroelectric materials, and they exhibit this classical hysteresis loop, which is the material switching from the up and down pole state. And what we do in this measurement, we take this little cantilever. At every point along this grid, we're driving the material through its transition. And at about 200 points along that triangular waveform that switches it, we're applying this band excitation waveform that excites the cantilever at a band of frequencies near its resonance. And the common analysis that you want to do, you need to do this band excitation because your resonance frequency shifts as you move across the surface and you change your tip surface contact. It changes slightly. And what the analysis you really want to do is you want to fit that to a simple harmonic oscillator model. But every single time you're doing this, it's the event horizon for that, it depends on your cantilever resonance to some extent, but about 4 milliseconds per chirp. So ideally, if we want to be able to drive materials into different topological states or write materials in a controllable way, we need to be able to drive the material, detect its transition, and stop applying a voltage. So that means we need to be able to fit this in real time. So first, the question is, can you use a neural network to accelerate? Can you do better with a neural network? So what we did is we kind of built this, what we call physics-constrained autoencoder. It's essentially an autoencoder. It takes your input data, which is your real and imaginary components, and uses various forms of, in this case, convolutional neural network. A very important part of this is that message passing layer, that residual layer there. Because we're doing a fit. So you want something that has good, the residual layer allows you to change your perspective field. So it's like looking at the data holistically and then looking at it very fine. So we want something that can look at the structure kind of at a large scale to figure out like where the initial guess is, kind of like what you would do with a regular fit. And then you want to optimize it with high precision. And that's kind of what this architecture allows us to do. But essentially, all this model is doing is predicting those 4 parameters of that governing expression. And because it's differentiable, this can act as a decoder, trains end to end, really easy. This is a 5,000 parameter model, super small, which makes it nice. Works really well. So if we compare it to like the conventional algorithms that have been published, the results look exactly the same. That's not exciting because they're the same. Who cares? More or less the same. We can see like we usually view this as a movie watching the switching process happen. From like an eye, you're not going to be able to tell any difference. That's good, but it's also not exciting because it's the same. We can do it with computing. But where things start to get interesting is when you start to add noise. So we can start to add a lot of noise to the data, and then what happens is conventional fitting algorithms kind of have some trouble. The reason why they have trouble is because that you have to design some heuristic to find a initial guess, and then you want to optimize within that initial guess. And if your initial guess is bad because of noise, then you get stuck in a local minimum, your fit is really bad. It's very hard to do, and it takes a lot of computational time. With the neural network, because you have these different perspective fields and you can leverage stochastic averaging, like the regularization parameter being the how you're doing the batching, you can end up getting, you can be much more robust to noise. And we've shown this in a few different cases, but if you look at this is 7 times the standard deviation of the noise in the data, here you're still seeing the phase here, and this phase is completely meaningless. I mean, you should have no information left in the data. And just to be clear, this was trained on the noisy data. It never saw the clean data. So like this is something like that at this noise level, if we had data at this noise level, we could never extract the information using the conventional fitting methods. These fits are just total garbage. There's nothing there. But with the neural network, we're able to actually extract reasonable parameters. They're not great, but they're reasonable. And that matters a lot because a lot of times we're applying a stimulus to a material, driving it to response, but that stimulus is also irreversibly altering the material. So if we can reduce the drive, then we can still capture the physics that we want without damaging the material. So this is the example movies, and these are with two optimizers. The top is atom, the bottom is second order optimizer. The second order optimizer works a little better, but you can see, at least you can still see the structure underneath. You can still see some basic understanding of what's going on in the switching process. And this data, if you look at the raw data, you can't even, like, I can't even see the peaks in the data. It's like, it is completely destroyed. But you're still able to capture the physics. With the top, you're not seeing anything. So this is kind of a really interesting finding. Then we said, okay, that's what we want to do is we want to make it fast. So how do we make it fast? And where I know Shashi is like, who does science really fast? And if you think the fastest place in the world that they do science is probably the Large Hadron Collider. So they're taking data, in this case, in at petabytes per second, and at 40 megahertz, they have to do data reduction on an ASIC. So I'm like, okay, is there a way that I can adapt some of the things that they're doing there? I think the thing from none, that's a pretty nice caveat, is it's 10 times the traffic in all of North America, which is just crazy, mind-boggling to think of. So we said, can we adapt what they're doing there to this kind of lab scale experiment? So kind of, we have to think about like what sort of hardware we use. So in this case, we're just doing kind of basic signal processing. We're taking our raw data from our photodiode. That data is, I think, at 10 megahertz. But we read it with a data acquisition system that has an FPGA. On that FPGA, we've deployed a model that does the FFT. The FFT, we'll show later, is actually the hardest part, of the most time-intensive process. And then we deploy our ultra-small neural network on there, and we can get our fit results in real time. So we're domain scientists. We're not FPGA programmers. We don't have a degree in electrical engineering. So how do we do this? We use a toolkit, which she works a lot on, as a HLS for ML. So what this does is this allows you to take models built in Onyx, Keras, TensorFlow, take those models, do some compression. You need to make them small because you've now added in a cool area for like kind of classical machine learning studies is you have new design constraints for your machine learning model. Like most of the time, if you want to add another million parameters to your model, it's not a big deal. You just get a bigger GPU. When you're talking about low latency machine learning applications, you need to really consider every operator that you have. So compressing your model, quantizing it, all these things are interesting design constraints for foundation ML studies. But once you have your model, you can do the HLS conversion. You can tune some things like how many times each operator is reused in the model, and then you can deploy it build it into an IP block for deployment. And when we do that, in this case, like it's incredibly easy because our latencies are not that. We're talking about a millisecond here. So our latencies that we're getting on our initial tests were on 34 microseconds. We're like, we don't need to do further optimization, but there are other places where we really do. And so what we've done is we've deployed this. So essentially, as the acquisition happens, we have the FFT, the neural network, and immediately we can get the results right away. And this allows us to do things like triggering in real time. And we're working on kind of building out the infrastructure to do kind of the first time we're like direct fabrication of topological states in materials, using this kind of approach to drive the material transition, detect it, and then stop the transformation. So now I'm going to talk about a different application, which I think is also just a really cool machine learning model that we've kind of developed to solve a unique problem in material science. How many people know of electron microscopy? Okay, anyone 4D transmission electron microscopy? Okay, so this is a very common technique that's used to understand at the subatomic level local crystal structure. So what you have is you have a focused electron beam, and it comes in and it's just like your slit experiments that you had back probably in this classroom, maybe even for physics, where your atoms act as your slits and you get a diffraction pattern. So every pixel you get a diffraction pattern. So it's kind of gets a lot of data. What you're really interested in understanding is you want to understand the scale, the shear, and the rotation, and also the crystallographic structure with sub-pixel precision. This is a pretty hard problem, particularly because the data is not clean like this. There's a lot of noise. So we said, is there a way to solve this problem with a neural network? And I wouldn't be saying it, or wouldn't be showing it if the answer was no. So, so we kind of designed this all architecture. So it starts out very simple. You take your diffraction pattern. This is a clean, like a noise-free diffraction pattern. So usually they're noisy. And you encode it, and you try to learn some statistical representation. That's the first step. And then the first step is we want to do like a classification. We want to determine what is the crystal structure. So to do that, we use this K-top layer, which essentially is doing like a sparse optimization. It's choosing one of many. And then we say, okay, we're going to decode that and overfit it. It doesn't matter because you're essentially having a one-hot encoded vector going into your decoder. So you get one of many different classes. Then we're saying, okay, what do we want to learn? We want to learn the strain on this image. So how can we do that? So we can take this information and learn the theta matrix of an affine transformation. So that's just applying the strain to the image. And if we take that initial image and apply that transformation, we could compare the mean squared error. We should, if we learn that, if it's close, we should have figured out the theta matrix, which is the strain. That doesn't optimize so well. There's other problems. So each spot is changing size. So we have to actually identify each individual spot and apply the inverse transform on each individual spot to correct for that transformation. And then to make the optimization better, it's actually very useful to do the inverse transform because you know it's a bijective function. Take the diffraction pattern, do the inverse transform, compare it to the original. And if you've done that, now fully unsupervised, because we don't have any labels, you're learning the theta matrix, which is the strain, and you're learning the crystal structure all at once. So because it's a machine learning benchmark, we wanted to get a simulated data set. So Colin Ophis at NCEM, National Center for Electron Microscopy at Berkeley, generated this data set, which has essentially just random oriented grains with X strain, Y strain, and shear strain at the integer values. So between -2 to 2, which is actually a very large strain. Most materials, you think about trying to like stretch a piece of wood by 2%, that's massive. You could never do that. This is really large strain. So it's actually a good test. And then we compared to his tool, Pi4D STEM, which is kind of something that they've been working on for about 4 or 5 years, kind of developing as a tool to do this sort of analysis. So you start out with a noise-free data set, mostly the same. He has some problems with the peak splitting, and we had him do these experiments because we got our results using his technique, and they weren't as good as these results. And we wanted to make sure that we were giving a fair test. So we told him, do your best job. This is our results. Can you beat it? And he said no. So you can see the sharp peaks mean good results. So we can see that our model is able to get the strain accurately at these individual peak values. When you start to add noise, again, we see the same effect that we saw with the band excitation piezo response. But the neural network, because of how it's doing stochastic averaging in the optimization process, you're able to, your peaks, you're able to do much better job at fitting noisy data, and this message passing also helps. It's something that we've shown, and we're starting to do some loss landscape studies to prove that a little more. But you can see the peaks are still much sharper in the autoencoder, and then you get to the point where like 60% of the signal, because this is a direct electron detector, so every electron is counted. So 60% of the signal, you can see, like, you can barely see the diffraction spots in these images. We're still getting pretty good results, pretty good resolution of the underlying structure. Where Pi4D STEM, which is like a correlation mapping, they like try to build a template and do pattern matching for each individual peak, get the strain vector and then calculate the strain. You're almost starting to lose all features at that stage. So we've done a pretty systematic benchmark kind of showing universally, because we have the data, we can add Poisson noise as we would expect. So it's really kind of a cool architecture. From how much time do I have left? Okay. So there's always a question, does this work on real data? Because like with science, like there's always interesting problems that come with real data. So we went we collaborate with David Muller and Yimo Han. David Muller's at Cornell, Yimo's at Rice on this tungsten selenide. So this is a 2D material. The expected structure should look something like this. This is kind of the example of some background noise. This is what the sample looks like. This is the best strain map that they were able to get from this paper, which was, I think, I don't know the year, I think it was 2020, but that we've had them revisit with the best algorithm that they could get. When we tried with our autoencoder, you could already see there's a lot more detail, a lot more fine structure that understand the quantum properties. They never saw those individual peaks representing the individual strain bands until we tried our autoencoder. And it's kind of really impressive to see when you actually look at the details, how much more information you're able to capture just by kind of re-envisioning how you use neural networks and how you do the optimization. And so I made it sound really easy. There was a lot behind the scenes. Like we couldn't just use, like in that case, we couldn't use first order optimizers. We use second order trust region optimizers that looked at the Hessian just to make sure the optimization worked well. We had to do some weird things with how we did adaptive masking to get the spots to work, but it does work very well when you get it right. And then we said, okay, we want to make this fast. So we took this model, and in this case, we distilled it and quantized it, deploy on an FPGA. We actually went a little too far, where we're working on kind of doing the co-design. So the one area that I think there's a lot of opportunities for work on is making the co-design process and the feedback loop much better between model design and training and deployment. Because in this case, I think we used like 20% of the resources when we finally got done with it. And we're like, okay, now we have to go back and train it from scratch again. That's a lot of work. But in this case, we were able to hit 29 microseconds latency on a frame, which is commensurate with the experiment. So this means that like we now, like usually this analysis happens like 2 days after the experiment's done. But the sample, to get the sample in the microscope, takes many hours, and it's only stable for probably an hour or two. So you have no feedback. So even as a human, you can't make any decisions. So having a system that you can have real-time analysis is really crucial. So side note is that like it ends up being only like less than 7 watts, which is cool if you want to have low power applications. So we've kind of started to do some other things, and kind of trying to re-envision like, where are there points where we can make science faster because we have better computing? And one kind of cool side project that we worked on with some people at Columbia, and one of my undergraduate students was thinking about magnetic confinement in tokamak. So this is, I am not the plasma physicist. I do not know anything about this. But what was really interesting was we've been working on a platform to accelerate and make kind of fast cameras much more usable and interoperable. So one of the problems are, if you watch YouTube and you watch any of these like YouTubers that look at like fast videos, they use these cameras called phantom vision. And they're really cool because they allow streaming high-speed cameras. So some of the cameras can go up to 120 kilohertz frame rates. And they use a very kind of simple standard protocol called coax express. So we've been working a lot on creating connections between those cameras to FPGA frame grabbers to stitch the images. And that allows you to save data at very high speeds. And we've kind of explored this in a lot of different applications, from cell sorting to monitoring growth processes, all sorts of different things. The problem that we eventually want to face is, like, we want to use this for control. We want to get images and use it to control some process. And this is kind of our first demonstration that we've actually deployed. The problem with, if you have data coming in this case, I think it's 8 gigabits per second streaming, which is fairly fast. It's not super fast. And if you want to make decisions kind of on the order of less than a microsecond, you start to go through PCIe hops. If you have 2 boards on your motherboard, plug them in. That connection, probably the communication between those 2 boards, maybe is about a millisecond, and maybe not so deterministic. That's too long. So you need to think about redeploying, new ways to deploy it. So we've worked with a company called Eurosys, and we're actually releasing a tutorial very soon. One of my undergraduate students, Ryan, who's going to go work at Northwestern very soon, made a tutorial that essentially it's a silly tutorial. It's always what are you going to do MNIST? So it's an MNIST tutorial, but it can do MNIST segmentation with microsecond latencies on an FPGA. And essentially takes you from the point of taking your data to deploying it onto with a camera to an FPGA. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking that initial coax express protocol and then passing that data directly to a convolutional neural network. And you can pass any convolutional neural network you want, as long as it fits on the hardware resources that we have, and then get some output in real time. Real time being whatever you want. In this case, we were hitting latency targets less than 20 microseconds to control the voltages on a tokamak, which is a cool first progress. So now I kind of want to talk a little bit about, how much, 5 minutes, 4 minutes? Okay, I'll wrap up quickly. Okay, so things that I think are particularly important. So in science, we're really bad about hardware infrastructure for computing. Like there's a computing and sysadmins, and the scientists, it's completely different. So building high availability clusters is something we're doing. So we have a new grant for $4 million where we're building out a new Kubernetes cluster for science, where we're connecting instruments directly to inference servers and composable ML pipelines. So think about breaking up each individual step in the ML process. You can do continuous rollout. So one thing that's like really common in scientific experiments is you're collecting data, you want to update your model, and then you want to redeploy it in real time. And you need to streamline that process so that people aren't involved. Other kind of cool things that we're doing. So this is my lab in pulse laser deposition. We're starting to do this plume right here. That is only 10 microseconds to image at 10 million frames per second. So we're trying to control plume dynamics in real time in pulse laser deposition. This is using that high-speed camera. We're monitoring surface diffusion phenomena in real time by kind of taking a conventional system that usually would operate at 100 hertz and going up to 1,000 hertz and being able to see actually, so each of those individual steps is a pulse of that laser coming in, depositing materials and watching the fusion on the surface, watching the atoms formed in nucleation sites. And this is really important for growing quantum materials, kind of be outside the scope. And we're like kind of just re-envisioning the whole pipeline of how we do science and thinking about ways that we can integrate kind of co-design of machine learning models and hardware. The last kind of example, and I'll leave because I know I'm running out of time, I think is really cool, is something we're trying to work on, which is ultra low dose imaging and electron microscopy. So one of the key challenges, you have a quantum material, like a lot of times you want to look at quantum decoherence, which is how long the quantum correlations are sustained. And you have this electron beam, and that electron beam is imparting energy. And that energy is so much that it can even move atoms, can change the position of atoms. And we're running blind because we set our dose and we move around and do our image. And we don't know what the right dose is. So we're guessing. But our materials are getting damaged, and sample prep can take weeks, maybe months, depends on what your sample is. So we're working on a system that can go and determine, do we have just enough signal to noise to capture the relevant physics? and use that as in a closed loop control to use an electrostatic dose modulator to control the density of the electron beam so that we can minimize the amount of damage, trying to push what we can do before we have to go to cryo-EM. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge some of the students. Ryan did a lot of work on the FPGA. The student Shiyu did a lot of work on the cycle consistent autoencoder, and you attended all the work on the symmetry project. And with that, thank you all for your attention, and happy to take any questions.
Work. I was wondering, like, you presented this and it's so important, the time, you know, to be able to process fast, and the images that were like for short duration available. And I'm thinking a lot of other groups are interested in understanding and reusing some of the workflows. I'm wondering, you mentioned a tutorial, but I'm pretty sure you're thinking about how to distribute these workflows in some way.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, like getting something from a single demo to be something that other people can use is a tremendous amount of work.
Yes.
And it's also work that no one wants to fund, unfortunately. I think so. The first big tutorial that we're doing is that one where we're gonna for the cameras, and the reason why we think that's the best tutorial to do is because it's so general purpose, because it works on tokamak, it works on our reflection high energy electron diffraction. It's just a CCD camera. We constantly post tutorials when we can, so we have like tutorials on our physics informed network on my website, which I'm happy to share. But yeah, making good reproducible and stable code that other people can use and tutorials that people can follow is really challenging. And I don't know if I have the answer to that, because it just takes people and bandwidth. It's hard.
So for the system that was classifying the different materials, you said current neural nets are bad at symmetry and those type of organizations. But I think eyes as brains are pretty good at it. So is there a difference? Is there a biological inspiration that could happen?
Ooh. I don't know that. If you look at those symmetries, I don't know. I have trouble figuring them out. So it's hard, especially when you go to 3D symmetries, which is where we'd want to go because we want to understand 3D crystal structures. I mean, there's got to be a better mathematics way to do it, but the problem is we've already, like, when you have an image, you're already ruining some of the symmetry features, and then you sort of think, okay, well, I'm gonna add noise to that, and then it gets even more chaotic.
Is that more like something you would apply for optimizing something in real time, or is it something you could apply to a system that you want to be
So I think it could be used in both aspects. I think it's knowing how hard it is to train that model and building like a foundation model that could deal with a lot of different variances that you would have in a normal set, because like every experimentalist sets up their image in a different way, and they're like that's hard. Eventually, yes, we want to build like foundation models. I don't know if we're there yet. If you have a very narrowly defined problem, I think you can use it in real time. And then for refinement, because it beats the state of the art algorithms, I think it's useful. The other thing is like the state of the art algorithms, they can't deal with multiple crystal structures like our model can. They don't know how to do that. There's no way. They have to manually do that. The other problem is that they're topological states where they're continuously varying, and the correlation strain mapping methods do not work well for those either. There's some edge cases that fail, but it's still early going on this.
Two questions. The first one is, what do you think like the largest challenges are for implementations of algorithms into control, either like dose dependent or the other control applications we were discussing?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is actually the hardware and implement, like getting the systems to talk well to each other. No one has made a nice standard that like we have the algorithms all up and running, and then it takes students many more months than designing the algorithms to get the two pieces to talk to each other. So protocols and like abilities to like, especially for the slower stuff, like I would really love to have a nice Kubernetes deployment that like was very easy to build composable ML pipelines that like someone wouldn't need a PhD already to start using. Because having high availability services is really important, because you can't have, if you're doing a control process, you can't rely on a single computer. It can't go down. So like those sort of like practical challenges, I think are really, really hard to solve. I think the like machine learning is incredible. It can pretty much solve everything, and you can always find a problem that it can solve in a reasonable way. So I think you can always, like there's always going to be a lot of applications, but getting it to actually operationalize into a deployment is the hardest part.
And then the other question was around fair practices for your field, like where, because I know within the microbiome community, there's like big push for like the national microbiome data collective to standardize data processes across different types of samples, in different environments from different groups. Is there like a large effort within the field to create that type of data standard?
Yeah, there
Or
are
is that something that you're taking on?
there's a lot of efforts. They're very isolated. Part of the problem, I think, like microbiome, I think is more standardized in terms of the data formats and tools that they use. In our field, like almost everyone does something different. And that makes it much harder to standardize. And so there's been a lot of standardization projects. And I think it goes back to a like people problem, in that if the person doesn't completely agree with the standard, they're not going to use it, and then you have no adoption. So my view is just like, I don't want to deal with the standard. I'm just going to make a tool that people can put whatever they want, and I'd rather have them have something there than nothing. And it's not going to be perfect, but at least it's something. So that's my view, but there are other people who love standards. I'm also just sick of going to workshops to talk about standards and nothing happens.
Thank you so much, Josh.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Random question. So, you talked about like the symmetries and like, how did you label the data?
Well, we generated the
Oh,
data.
you did. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so in that case, we generated the data. So we have a lot of, we're actually going to release that data set.
Okay. Okay.
So that data set's going to get released. I was actually talking with Nathan about that. It's a cool problem. Because it's 10 million data, like 10 million images.
Well, I was looking at the size and like, who did that?
Yeah. And we have like more, we have subtasks too, because we have all the metadata associated. So you have like where the image was originally captured from, what the vectors were,
Yeah.
where the points of symmetry are.
Okay.
So there's like, we don't want to just classify symmetry. That's kind of boring. We want to actually detect where the symmetry is.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal. But